What is up, fellow thunkers? Darren here with a tutorial for you. Today we're going to be looking at the any component blocks. Now it is hard to summarize what all the any component blocks can do really in one video, but more so just trying to say it in one sentence is hard. So if I had to try, I would say that the any component blocks allow you to do three things: create new components, dynamically edit existing components, and remove components from the screen. And so what I want to do here in this video is not kind of touch about the definitions of any of these, because there is some great documentation on the any component blocks. But before I even say that, what am I talking about here? If you scroll down on the blocks tab of any of your screens in your app, you go down to the bottom. What I'm talking about here are the any component blocks. And so what this video is going to be about is not a definition of each of these, because Thunkable has great documentation on this. You can see all the different sections and all this good stuff. But rather what I want to do is kind of give you an introduction of how to use these and 4 examples of the ways I'm using these blocks in the apps that I am making. So can we do that? Can we do that in this video? I just wanted to shoot this kind of introduction to any component blocks. So let's go ahead and jump into it. And the first thing we're going to talk about before we get to the examples is just kind of the basics, and that's three blocks I want to talk about. Got that one, this one, and this one. All right. So this one is called the component block, and all it is a getter block. What it does is it gets some component on your screen. So if you wanted to compare something to label 1, then you would need this block to compare it to that. That's about as good of an explanation you're going to get out of me. It makes more sense once you start doing some examples. So that's the component block. Then you have these 2 generic set. This is what they're officially called, the generic set. You can see the word set here, and generic get block. And maybe I'll pop this open. So we're talking about these 2. These are very similar to the other get and set blocks that we have on all of the other components. You can see these dark green is the setters and the light green is the getters. But the powerful thing here that the any component provides is that we can dynamically populate what component we are plugging in here. So this is useful if you're wanting to loop through a list of components and change all of the properties, or like we'll see in some examples in this video, if you want to edit the properties of a component you just created or cloned through the any component blocks, this is what we're going to be using. So enough about those. Let's get into a few of our examples. So I'll go ahead and delete all these blocks. All right, so first example, and this is going to be an example of the generic event block. Each of my 4 examples are going to introduce a new type of any component block, and we're going to kind of use that. So here, the generic event block. All right, so the way I've used this is creating a keyboard. I've done this in 1 app so far. And so basically they wanted a keyboard on the screen, so it wasn't like the native keyboard on the device. It was actually buttons that you're pressing on the screen. And so what I did for this was I created the column. I created a section, and then in the rows, column, and then formatted all these buttons. So we have 10 buttons here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. And each of these, the text of the button is actually the number that it represents. And so how can we use the any component blocks to make when I press this button, the number appears on the screen or is added to the text in this screen. So when I press 1, it goes here. When I press 4, it goes here. Now, traditionally, what you would do is come to when button 1 is clicked, set the text of text input 1 to the text text of button 1 right here. So let's just test that out. So boom, it pops up there. But what happens? I can't press all of these other ones. So then you might be convinced to, okay, we're going to duplicate this and then do this for button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. So that's 10 times you got to do the same thing. Well, any component, generic event block, which is this one right here, this allows us to make this a lot easier. So what we can do here is I'm saying when any button is clicked, and I can do different types of components here. I can say when any switch is switched or changed, I can do something. But in this case, when any button is clicked, what do we want to do? Well, I'm going to grab the same text input that I used before, set the text right there, and then I'm going to use the any component getter. So from this component that we're clicking is a button. So I'm going to say from button, the component we just clicked, get text. And so now this allows us, when any button is clicked on the screen, we're going to display in text input the text of that button. And so effectively, not effectively, but now this works. Every time we press a button, it's going to display the number of the button we just pressed. And all we needed was a few blocks here. So very, very powerful. And so here I'm using 5 blocks, whereas the other method I would have been using, what's 5 times 10? 50 blocks. So definitely more efficient in all aspects. So let's look at another example and introduce another any component block. So in this example, we're going to be looking at the all component blocks. So basically, the scenario I've set up here is extending what we just looked at. Okay, so in the last one, we wanted to detect when any button is clicked, then do something. But here, we want to do something if any of these buttons are clicked, but not this one. So you can see all of these buttons change the screen color. This button does not change the screen color. So we want to change the background screen color when the blue buttons are pressed, but not when this red one is pressed. So how can we do that? So we'll start out very similar to what we were doing. When any button is clicked, and let's just get the basics out there. So when a button is clicked, we want to set the background color of the screen to a random color. But how do we exclude that one button that we did not want included in there? So what we can do is, if we want to exclude something, that means we want to check something. And whenever we want to check something, we need the if block. So we're going to check if the component that we just pressed, we want to see if this component is in this blue section. And you'll see that all of these blue buttons are inside of a row here that is called buttons that do change color. So what I can do is use an any component block called, or one of the all component blocks. And what this does is it gets all of the whatever component we're doing inside of something else. So in this case, we want to get all buttons inside of the row buttons that do change color. And we want to check if the component we just pressed is in this group of all buttons. And so for that, we'll use a list block. Does list this list of all the buttons in that row contain the component we just pressed. All right, boom. Looking at my notes, this is all we need. Cool. So let's go ahead and test this out. All right, so here we have all component blocks example. When I press this button, nothing happens. But when I press any of these, the background color changes. Just press this one, nothing happens. Press these, something happens. Awesome. Third example, we're moving right along. The clone block example. So there are two more blocks you should be aware of in the in components. That's the create and the clone. So both of these do similar things in that they add something to the screen. But the difference is that create is creating a fresh new component, whereas clone is copying something that is already on the screen. So you're cloning something that's on the screen and then editing it if you want to. Whereas the create, you're creating a new component that has no styling, nothing in it, no data. So you can tell I kind of prefer the clone method because it allows us to copy something that's already been styled, already has components in it. If you're using like a row or a column, you have buttons and stuff in it. So the clone is very, very useful. So what are we trying to do in this example? The main way I use the clone is whenever I'm creating a custom list viewer. So the list viewer currently in Thunkable is very, very limited. You can only have text, and that's pretty much it. So a lot of the apps I work on, they want to have labels and then buttons and then sometimes pictures. And so what I use the clone for is when I have a row that I want to clone and then populate with data. And so that's what we want to do here. I want to clone this row whenever this button is clicked and then add in a random number here. So let's look at how we can do that. So the button that's clicked is called button clone. And when this is clicked, we want to clone something. What do we want to clone? Well, I labeled it nicely here, row to clone. So I want to clone row to clone as first in column of clones. So what this is going to do is clone that row we were just looking at inside of the column that this row is already inside of. So let's look at that. Go ahead and test that out. All right, so clone new row, press that, and boom, it's cloning the rows, and it's just going to keep on adding those. Cool. So how do we update something in a row that we just cloned? Well, we can use some more of the any component blocks. So in this case, I wanted to change this number to a random number. So let's go ahead and do that. So for this, that number is a label. So I know we're going to be updating a label, and we're going to be updating that label to a random number. So let me go ahead and get the random integer, and we'll just say this is from 0 to 9. But how do we know what label that we are updating? Because this clone right here represents the row, represents this row, and the label we want to update is inside of the row that's cloned. And there's two labels here. There's a first one and a second one. So what if we said, I want to get all of the labels inside of the row, and then I want to update the last one of those labels in that row. So there's two, I want to update the second one. Well, we can do that with the any component blocks. So we'll use the all right here, the all label in clone. So that's going to give us the two labels that are in the item we just cloned. And then, like I said, we want to get the second one or the last one. So I can come to the list blocks and in list get the second one. Or in this case, I'm just going to say get last. So from label, the last label in the row we just cloned, set the text to a random number. So let's go ahead and test this out. All right, moment of truth. Boom. And so you can see every time I press this button, we're cloning the row and then giving that second label a random number. All right, let's move on to our last example. And this is going to be showing one of the last any component blocks that we haven't touched on, which is the remove block. So in this example, I want to remove a component on the screen. So there's a few use cases for this. Most of the times when I'm removing something, it's whenever I've cloned a list and then I want to delete something from that list. But in this case, we're just going to be deleting buttons. So for this example, I want to delete a button whenever I press it. So this one is very simple. And we're going to expand on this here in a sec, but very simple. So when any button is clicked, we want to remove it from the screen. So we'll just grab this remove. And what do we want to remove? The component we just clicked. And that's all we need for that one. So now whenever I press a button, it removes it. Cool. But I wanted to extend this a bit further because now I'm left on the screen with no buttons. So I wanted to combine everything that we learned in this video and show you how to generate buttons. What I want to do is generate basically what we're seeing here. I want to generate the buttons that we can then press to delete. So I want to reformat, reset this example using the create method. So whenever there are no more buttons left on the screen, we want to create 6 buttons with the text, press a button to delete it, give it a random color, and make it fill in all of the space available. So let's look at how to do that. So here, when any button is clicked, we want to remove, but then we want to check if there are no buttons left. Okay, so whenever we want to check something, we grab the if block, and then we want to get when all the buttons in our column of buttons, we want to see if this is empty. So we'll go to our list, and they have a handy little block for this. So we're getting all the buttons in the column of buttons and checking to see if it is empty. And so if it is, then we want to generate a few buttons. So let me go ahead and create a list. And this is going to be the slow part because I got to type all this in. So we had 6 buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and add 3 more items here. And in each of those items, I'm going to have text. And it's going to be the text of those buttons. I think we had press, duplicate, duplicate. Am I going to say it again? Yes, duplicate. Press a button to delete it. All right, so now for each of these words, we want to create a button. So let's do that. So we'll say for each item in list, we'll go to our any components and create a button. as last in column of buttons. So let's go ahead and test this out. Whenever we get rid of all the buttons, we should now generate 6 buttons, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then boom, it generates 6 buttons on the screen. So now let's go ahead and use the any component set blocks to style these. All right, so get the setter, and we want to update the component, and this is a button. And then let me go ahead and duplicate this a few times. So we're going to update the text, the color, the height, and the width. Text, background color, height, and width. Let me go ahead and do the height and width. We're going to set this to fill container. Same thing for width. The background color is going to be a random color. And then the text is going to be from this list. So we're saying for each J in list, so what is J? J is whatever item we're on. So then I can come to my variables and get J. And I think that should be good. So let's go ahead and do our last test here. So remove block example, we press these buttons, they are deleted, and then it generates 6 more buttons for us. Press a button to delete it, so I can press all these buttons. Right, once I press this, it's going to check and see if everything's gone, and generate 6 more. Awesome. So that is all the examples I'm going to share in this video on the any component blocks. Definitely let me know if you liked this video, and maybe I will do some more. A few last notes for you. I published this using the new Thunkable web app feature, and the link will be in the description where you can come and test out all of these. You'll come to this page here, and you can test out all the examples. But if you want to actually get your hands on this project, and you want to actually edit this and maybe extend this or see the code a little bit further, this app is in my Remix Vault, which contains all of the apps that I do tutorials on this channel, where you can copy those, edit them, use them however you would like. If you want to get access to my Remix Vault, then you can click the link at the top of the description. That's where you can check out how to get access to that. And the last thing I will say is, again, I did examples of the any component blocks in this video. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty of each one of them, you can go to the documentation, which I'll also have in the description. So that is going to be all for today's tutorial. Thank you for watching, and happy coding.